now it's time to welcome you to our Q&A program. Derek and I are pleased that you chose to join us today. We're here to give you straight answers so you'll have peace of mind that you know how to get to a successful future at your association. And it starts with a little bit of groundwork. And the first question is, well, why are we doing this and why do we care? And it's because every year you need to know how much reserves you should responsibly set aside. And there are, as I said, some foundational principles. And one of these is the 4 reserve rules. That expenses always happen. Nothing we can do about that. The board's responsible to care for the assets of the association. Delays usually get expensive and homeowners always get stuck paying the bills. So in there in number 2 and number 3 is something very important that we want to help you with today. The board's responsible and delays usually get expensive. And all we do here at Association Reserves is based on National Reserve Study standards, which date back to 1998. So we're standing on very firm ground here. And we'll keep the numbers very simple today. For example, there's 3 types of reserve studies: a full update with site visit and an update no site visit. And then similarly, there's 3 parts to every reserve study. Keeping these kind of things in mind will help you understand the rhythm of how Derek and I are answering questions. There's the component list, which we call the foundation of your reserve study. And there's the reserve fund strength that we calculate based on the comparison of your cash to your component list. And then the recommended funding plan, which is your path to the future. And then there's a 4-part test. And this is the test for something to determine if it's appropriate to fund through reserves: common area responsibility, limited useful life, predictable remaining life, and above a minimum cost. And finally, best practices. This was a research report that was completed and published in April 2020, very timely. And it came to the 4 conclusions that for a building to age successfully, you need to do 4 things. Number 1 is update your reserve study regularly, get fresh information because it changes with the building conditions, size of your reserve fund, economic environment. Fund your reserves as recommended. Make sure you're putting the cash in that your reserve fund needs. Spend reserves as recommended. Remember, delays usually get expensive, so spend it, get things done, care for the property, and then supplement it. Perform periodic infrastructure inspections by an architect or engineer. We in the reserve study business are budget and cash flow specialists. We know buildings, we see them all the time, we work with them, but there's no substitute for the insights from an architect or engineer to deal with structural and hidden type elements of your building. So with that introduction, I will then pop off screen sharing. And now it's time to start answering questions. So Derek, say hello. Kick us off.
Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Robert, I got a whole list of questions from the audience even before we got started, and I'm really excited to answer them. I know from my work, I get to answer these questions one at a time, or maybe to just, a handful of board members, but now we have a few hundred people on our webinar, and we're going to get to answer them for everyone all at the same time.
Sounds great. Let me see if I can put us on the screen so the audience can see. So give me a moment here. I believe that's good.
We got your slide presentation, Robert.
Okay. Are you, let me flip that back then. And are you seeing the 2 of us on screen?
I got us 2 on the screen.
Excellent. Okay, we'll keep it that way. So you gonna start us off with some easy ones, or you handle them all?
Yeah, let's start off with a great one. Here's a great question. So is a reserve funding plan which targets a certain funding level with special assessments as needed acceptable? For various reasons, our HOA is unlikely to fully fund our reserves. How do HOAs always agree to fund needed expenses to maintain building long term?
Is that for me or is that for you?
I'll start by answering.
Okay, cool.
So the best way, there's multiple ways to fund reserves. Ultimately, the best way to fund reserves is through regularly budgeted contributions. It's really the fairest way to budget and fund for reserves. If you use 1 year's worth of the roof, then it's your responsibility to pay for your share of 1 year's worth of that roof. Now, alternatively, if you budget for special assessments in future years, then you're not necessarily fairly assessing the membership for their fair share of that roof. And so what's really, really important is if you actually choose to do it, to fund reserves in this fashion, is that you're actually disclosing correctly to the members each and every year.
Derek, I'm writing some notes here. I'd add a couple things on that. I guess number one, you never know if you're going to be able to pass a special assessment. So a board may think they have that in their hip pocket, but they're never sure. The ownership may vote it down. And just like you said, a special assessment is a lump sum payment for something that deteriorated over many, many years. And I guess the question is, why wait? Why not just increase the homeowner reserve funding level of $5, $7, whatever it is per month? And that way everyone pays it on an ongoing basis. And like you said, if you are there for 1 year, you pay 1 year worth of roof deterioration. You don't get stuck with potentially paying an entire 20-year expense for this or that or the other thing. But good start off question.
Yeah. Robert, I noticed right away one of your 4 rules you put up on there was if you defer or wait, things get more expensive. And this could kind of snowball into that kind of a case where, you need a special assessment, you can't get it passed, you just deferred redoing the roof and water starts getting into the building. So I could see, that expense just getting much more expensive with this approach.
Prime example.
Okay, next up on the list here. How do we stay up to date with key requirements for association that require action and potential expenditures that need to be planned for? Recent example are fire alarm upgrades and balcony inspections. I assume they're talking about the elevated deck inspection requirement in California.
Sounds like it, yes.
Yeah. And so right away, my thought process is just regular reserve study updates. You need to bake in that information as it becomes available into your study. These are living, breathing documents that get updated and improved over time. And as more information becomes available, like that elevated deck inspection requirement in California, we can implement that into the reserve study and get it updated.
Yeah. Like you said, there's the best practices. The best practices are update your reserve study regularly. You'll hear about that from your reserve study provider, but also plug into other industry trade organizations, things like CAI. They have it's very inexpensive. Plug in, get their monthly newsletter or every other month. And there's other trade organizations. So make sure you're listening to what your manager has to say, the trade organization has to say. There's great pipelines of information and multiple ways to stay in touch with what's going on.
Yeah. I really value and like and appreciate ECHO in my marketplace. It's Executive Council of Homeowners Associations. It's a trade organization that offers just tremendous educational experience and for board members and property managers.
Excellent.
Yeah. Next on the list here, we have the current board majority, so 3 out of the 5 board members, voted to withdraw $50,000 from reserves to upgrade front yard landscaping. The expenditure is not in the study, so not in the reserve study, and the existing reserve funds does not take into account these $50,000. How will this affect our funding levels?
Well, they're going to drop down. I guess when I hear that, there's 2 things there. One is it doesn't appear in our reserve study. And number 2 is an upgrade. And my basic thinking is reserve funds are precious. You don't want to be spending them casually. The reserve funds are there. I think we've been talking about for the roof, for other big projects, asphalt, painting, big expensive projects. You don't want to be depleting them for something that is nice. Reserve dollars have a job. And their job is to repair and replace what they were collected to accomplish. And so if the board is spending reserves on things that are not particularly reserve projects, then that's going to deplete the reserve fund for the inevitable roofing, painting, asphalt, carpeting, pool resurfacing, those kinds of things. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, landscaping upgrades, refurbishment, drought tolerant landscaping has definitely become a big factor in reserve studies these days. So um, I I believe that we should have funding set aside for those associations that need it. Whether it's $5,000 or $50,000 or $500,000, that's just a different question. Um, but we need to build that into the funding. We need to start building up funding for that project. So as soon as you know that the number is $50,000, you should work directly with your reserve analyst to build that into the funding level and understand what the funding levels kind of deteriorate at or adjust to.
Right. Derek, I think I was sensitive to the word upgrade there. If it's a necessary project, then that's a different thing. If it passes the 4-part test, that it's a common area maintenance responsibility, life limited, with a predictable remaining useful life and above a significant repair or replacement cost, then that's exactly what you want to be funding through reserves. But if it's just upgrading some planting because this board majority likes one thing versus the other thing, that is not a wise move. But if you are in like California and you need to, if you need to regularly modernize or refurbish your landscaping, which is a very reasonable thing, dial that into reserve funding and make sure that that is one of your components that you are funding for.
Yeah. And you definitely want to understand the implications of how much you're going to spend on the project. So how large the scope grew towards. I had a client that regularly budgeted $10,000 for landscaping, and then they upped it to $50,000, and then the board signed off on spending $500,000 on reserve. And they wanted to understand why their funding levels dropped so rapidly,
and why your recommended reserve funding went way up.
Right. So before you spend the money, talk to the reserve specialist to understand what the impact is. Yeah. Okay. We have potentially $30,000 in new waistline expenditures within the next 12 months. We don't think we want this in our reserve study. But what do we do to set aside for this funds, and how do we organize this?
Well, is it really a question of what they want or what they don't want? I think there's a lot of expenses in life that we don't want, but board members are not in the position to do wishful thinking. They're in the job of taking care of the common areas. And so you have to get rid of the, we don't think we want to. But like you suggested in the last one, talk to your reserve save provider. That's what they're there for. We are here to help guide the association towards a future. We know the property. We can call up the file and have some comments on it. But this sounds like the waistlines. It doesn't say what it is, but it may be a clean out. And let's say a clean out could be something you need to do every 10 or every 15 years. That sounds like a reserve project. What's your thinking on this?
Yeah. Robert, I've been doing reserve studies for almost 20 years now. And when I got into the business, the wastewater sewer lines or the laterals weren't really something that we really thought about. We kind of looked at them as like life of project. But I will say that like within the last 5 years, my mindset on this has definitely changed. And I've definitely been including them in more of my projects that I work on. In my marketplace, I'm in San Francisco in the east side of the Bay. So they call it the East Bay. There's cities, municipalities, and then utility companies that are requiring the properties over there to actually replace their sewer laterals. So this is not uncommon. It's a current factor in a lot of the studies that I put together. And so we're starting to better understand that these are components that need to be included in the study every 40 to 60 years.
Okay.
So if you ask this question and whether or not you wanted to be included in the study, I would suggest you include it in the study, budget to get it completed in the next 12 months, and then have it cycle again in roughly 50 years.
Got it.
It's just an item and a responsibility that the property is going to need to take care of.
Yeah, and there's technological improvements. Now there's cameras that you can snake down there and get a good look at what you're dealing with. So there's less guessing.
Yeah, definitely. And another side effect is just like the vegetation and the trees are becoming more mature, and better yet, the root systems on those trees are making their ways into those underground piping.
Especially in your market, California, where it's very dry,
Yep.
and those roots are looking for any kind of moisture they can find.
Yeah, they're good at that too.
It's a matter of survival.
Yep. Okay, next question here. Some of our reserve funds are invested in accounts that have significant loss in value due to the current market. So our balance is significantly below target for this year. What do you recommend?
I guess a number of thoughts. First is we did a webinar just recently called Inflation and Investments. And we talked all about the idea of what is, because so often we talk about the reserves, your projects, your responsibilities as a board member, those kinds of things, how much you need to fund, your components, all these kind of things. And then we've been ignoring the whole subject about your reserve fund itself. What do you do with your $100,000 or $500,000 or $5 million? And the number one rule is protection of principal, POP. You don't want to put it in any kind of investment vehicle where you could lose funds. And it sounds like this is what this association did. It may be tempting to use an investment vehicle that gives a higher rate of return, but remember the board of directors has a responsibility to care for the assets of the corporation. They're not in a position to be able to gamble with winning and losing. So the first thing is move your reserves to somewhere where they are protected. And then Derek, what do you think about the second is contact your reserve study provider and get an update to your reserve study to see how that's going to change your funding.
Yeah, and I would take it one step further. There's specialists in the HOA trade industry that are really good at modeling and investing your reserve fund. So there's HOA bankers and HOA investors. Robert mentioned that we did a webinar with one. Full disclosure, Robert and I, we do not give advice on investment vehicles. We're reserve specialists. We put together reserve studies. We're budget experts, but we're not necessarily giving advice on investment strategy.
Yeah. You want our help on your reserve study, not on investment strategy. That's where you're going to get your best value.
Yeah. Great. Hey, I got one for you here, Robert.
Okay.
Since I'm in the Denver metro area, does it look like Colorado and other states are going to be mandating reserve studies? And if so, is there a clear picture on what that could possibly look like?
Good point. In Colorado last year, there was a proposed bill mandating reserve studies. I think it was every fifth year that the governor ended up not signing. So it came right to the governor's desk. So all across the country, there is more pressure on boards to do the right thing. And so legislation is around every corner. I don't know what will happen in Colorado, but more and more are discussing tighter reserve study legislation. Some, because it's been percolating for years and years and years, it is appropriate that board members be encouraged to do the right thing, to set funds aside. And a lot of states are tightening up their legislation and closing that loophole. But I can't quite say exactly what Colorado will do. Some of this was due to, of course, the Champlain Tower South tragedy from last year. No state wants that to be happening in their backyard. So rightfully so, the legislators are looking for insights, input from the constituents. What's the right thing to do? And I see tightened up legislation everywhere.
Yeah. Okay, great. Next question. How often should your association have a reserve study done? So first rule of thumb is it's obviously based on state mandate or law. 99% of the work I do is done right here in California. And in California, there's a requirement to do an on-site inspection every 3 years with annual financial review and disclosure. We call those no-site visit reserve studies. So essentially annually in California. Other states are as often as every 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. after the Champlain Tower South collapse last year, CAI came out with a condo safety best practices, and they talked about a with site visit update every third year being the cost-effective best practice, because that's the a good, I guess, a good interval between having a with site visit every year and a with site visit every 5th or 10th year. You wait too long and all of a sudden all your assumptions go out of whack. So what you described, that with site visit update every third year with the very inexpensive no site visit updates in the in-between years, that's a very, very cost-effective pattern that keeps your association right on track.
Yeah. Robert, I'll just add, 3 years, the last 3 years, there's been so much change economically, just like, additional requirements in California. I have some clients that are coming back to me, and even though the state of California requires a with site visit reserve study every third year, it may have been 5 years or 6 years, they just forgot, kind of thing. And we get their reserve study to update, and it's just so off track, and we're giving them new information moving forward, but they oftentimes are scratching their head wanting to know why things are so much different. And just the last 3 years kind of proves that point.
Well, yeah, just thinking about inflation. We went through 1 year, a couple of years ago, where wood fences, wood products just skyrocketed. And if you look back just 3 years, you'll say, wow, how much prices have changed. And if you haven't updated your reserve study, you're now 3 years behind all that inflationary effect on all your components.
Yeah, we have some really great questions on inflation and interest. I think we probably won't get to them until the second session today. But I will say, just this year, the last 12 months, prices are up so big, much more than inflation. And if we go back to the beginning of the pandemic, they're up probably at least 30 or 50%.
Yeah. Makes a big difference.
Yeah. Okay. Sometimes this is, let's roll and spin into something I just kind of sort of answered. Sometimes the estimates and surveys are not in line with our bids. How can you explain that? So I'll start by saying, just kind of right now.
Well, that was our competition, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So in today's environment, just economically, it's just an ever-changing environment. There's all sorts of labor shortages, material costs are way up. There's a real demand for these expert vendors that can take care of these large-scale projects like roofs and siding projects and major mechanical replacement projects. So if you're not in line, then you're probably not getting the project. And if you're not paying the right price point that they're asking, then they're going to find the work somewhere else.
Yeah. Best solution there is to update your reserve study regularly. And like you can imagine, like we just said a moment ago, if you've been waiting 3 years to update your painting or roofing estimate, you're going to be way off. And so if you're looking at a 3-year-old or across the country 5-year-old reserve study and wondering why your reserve study says $100,000 for a roof and the roofer just bid it at $160,000, that's not surprising to me. There have been so many changes. So a reserve study is a long-term target, and your best strategy is updating it regularly. So you keep the changes small, but it does mean that you will probably need to tweak it on an ongoing basis, a regular ongoing basis.
Yeah. And I would just add that if you have projects that are coming due and they're large projects, get your experts involved right away. And get actual quotes from them, and then provide them to your reserve study specialist. We do our best to track data all day long, and we do a really great job at it. But information that's applicable to your project and your property is all the more better, and we can really tune in your reserve study.
Yeah. Let me add a couple more thoughts on that. One is we had a client that was approaching a very large roof project. My recollection was it was like 1.2 million. And they saw all the inflation that was going on. They wanted to make sure they were prepared for it. And they actually got counsel from their roofing expert that do it now. don't wait for the last 2 years, because in 2 more years, it may turn out to be a $2 million project. So do it now. It may be a hair early, but at least you know it's going to be a $1.2 million project. And that was interesting thinking on the board, almost like commodities trading, doing it now to prevent it being expensive in the future. And then if it's something that burns a lot of energy, like a boiler, a chiller, cooling tower, even some elevator systems, if you're dealing with a 20-year-old unit, you may be burning a lot of energy, and it may be in your best interest. And there may even be energy incentives from your local power company to change it out a little bit on the early side and start using the energy cost savings to help pay back that early replacement. So there's all these other factors that I'm dialing in all the different possibilities. But yeah, Derek, like you said, talk to your reserve study provider. They may give you an interesting idea, and it's not always, well, wait till the end of its life.
Yeah, great point, Robert. And I would add, not just your reserve study provider, but talk to your team, your counsel, your experts that really know your property manager, maybe your attorney. They can offer you some additional insights, and you can make some adjustments on the fly that help your association.
Yeah. And managers often, I should say portfolio managers, they see so many properties, and you can learn. I think my mom always said, it's better to learn. You can learn from your mistakes, but it's better to learn from the mistakes of others. And so keep your radar on and see what's going on in your industry.
Robert, sounds like your mom was a wise woman.
Well, she was also a school teacher.
Okay. Okay, next question here. Using local data for estimates, I expect typical reserve studies rely on some sort of national database of expected lifespans and replacement costs. If the HOA was able to show records of previous cost history and project and scope, would you then implement that into your reserve study?
Let me turn that back to you. You're the one doing more reserve studies, you and your team.
Yeah, I put absolutely.
Yeah.
The best information that we can bake into your reserve study, because these are not one size fits all. They're very much so tailored towards your property, is your actual cost history, scope of work, and we can take that information and build it into your reserve study.
Yeah. And you're in a position to see, well, even a couple moments ago, you talked about something, the properties on the East Bay, you were lumping them together. You learn what's going on at your properties. You see what's happening. You know properties that have replaced their roof or repainted or done asphalt projects. And you know what the costs are here, east side versus west side versus north versus south versus downtown. You see that all the time. So you're in a perfect place to help particular associations learn from the costs of others. And so, yeah, that's the best information. We're always going to give, wouldn't you say, best information, not just look it up in a book somewhere.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And even though we have data that's nationally recognized, some of it's just not going to be applicable to projects that are in downtown San Francisco. So we really want to rely on localized information that's very specific to a property or property type.
Absolutely.
Next question. What about attempting to use insurance in lieu of reserves? For instance, if a component needs repair but is not in terrible condition, is it prudent for the HOA to wait for an event like a hailstorm so that then they can put in an insurance claim to get it taken care of?
Interesting thinking, clever thinking.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure I want to, well, like you said earlier, it's one thing to pay for a new roof. It's another thing to pay for a new roof after you've had water damage to every unit on the top floor. It just gets very, very expensive. Roofs are the kind of things you want to do a hair early, not a hair late. And I don't think you ever want to be in a situation where you're actually hoping for a hailstorm. Again, we talked about it with investments. The board is not in a position to be making gambles. Their job is to care for the assets of the corporation as a fiduciary, as a trustee. And anyway, That's all my initial thinking. Don't do it. Don't wait. If you need to replace a roof or replace a fence, do it. Don't wait for a windstorm to blow the fence down. To take care of the property. That's
Yeah.
Oh, and I think, and maybe, yeah, I think there is actually a new Florida law that if your roof is over 10 or 15 years old, you can't get full replacement cost through insurance, something like that.
Okay.
Um,
Maybe prorated.
Yeah, exactly. A prorated replacement. And so the insurance companies are wising up that maybe the majority of the damage was 20 years of sunshine and rain and normal things, and not that windstorm from last week.
Yeah. Yeah. Robert, if you can get insurance money, take it and run.
Yep.
Apply it to your fix. But like insurance, and I hope my insurance people are on this call, just cover your ears, please. Insurance companies are really great at taking your money, but they're not always the best at like paying out for projects. So they make it hard. Your point in Florida, there's that new law that they're going to prorate, how used up your roof is. So the best approach is just through regular reserve contributions to make sure that the funds are available to take care of your project when it comes due.
Right. That last phrase. So you can take care of the projects when it comes due. That's your job.
Yeah.
Your job is not to be gambling.
Yeah. Hey, Robert, I'm going to shift gears. I think we have roughly 10 minutes, but we probably need some time for closeout. I got a lot of questions in the Q&A and I hadn't had a chance to look just yet.
Okay.
So give me one moment here. Okay, we already covered this one. One moment here. Okay. What percentage increase are you or will you be using in the current cost estimates in 2023 reserve studies? And do you see any scenarios where you would recommend reducing annual reserve contributions in 2023 from 2022?
I'll take a quick stab on it. Actually, I did an analysis yesterday where we recommended a significant decrease in the reserve funding. And that was because they had been in a multi-year push to strengthen their reserves. And we delivered the good news that, hey, folks, you've arrived. You can finally slow down and just stabilize. So it depends on how fast you've been funding your reserves. But Derek, you said it a moment ago, these are custom analyses, and it all depends on the timing of all your different reserve projects, how big they are, how much cash you have, how much that particular project has been inflated. So I don't think we can say that in general, our client recommendations are up X percent over last year, but I think it's safe to say that 95, 98% of our client recommendations are significantly increased over what they had been doing.
Yeah, Robert, all my tracking and trending I'm seeing these days is that project estimates are up 10 or 20% in just a year. And so, considering that most associations are underfunded, you should at least start by thinking that your reserve contributions need to go up at least to that level.
Yeah, 10 or 20%.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but we said it's the board's job. And it sounds very simple. Just balance your income with your expenses.
Right.
And the expenses are going up, and so the income needs to go up.
Yeah. And while it's great when we get to deliver that good news, you don't need an increase this year to reserve contributions. The fact of the matter is the majority of our clients do need increases to the reserve contributions based on the current economic impacts.
Yeah. And again, if they're coming for a reserve study update 3 years from the last time, here it's 2022, so it's 2019. Boy, that was pre-pandemic, pre a lot of things. There's been so many things that have changed in the last 3 years in our community association industry.
Yeah. Here's a similar question, but I think we can continue to kind of elaborate on it. So for the next 12 months, what percentage cost are you proposing for construction cost index, so CPI basically, and what investment rates are you proposing to your analyses? So it's basically an inflation and interest question.
Yeah.
We know that inflation's up in the 8% area. CPI is actually higher, at least 10 or 11% right now currently. But then actual cost estimates that we're seeing for these major projects are up probably 15 or 20%. Interest rates, the majority of my clients are still earning below 1%. But as the Fed continues to increase the rates, hopefully soon enough, interest rates for homeowners associations will go up and they'll start earning more monies on their current reserves. But we're still using a factor of a roughly 1% for interest, and inflation is roughly 3 or 4% in a reserve study. But that being said, we're also increasing our cost estimates in real time by more than 10%.
Yeah, I think let me follow up on that, and we'll just chat for a moment. I think we need to make sure our audience understands that we're separating current costs from future costs. Current costs, boy, you're having to increase them 10, 15, 20% or more because of what has changed over the last few years. But our reserve side projection is a 30-year plan. And so we don't have an expectation that this high inflationary environment that we're in now is going to exist for the next 30 years. So we're trying to find the balance between what the current costs need to be. And then since the reserve study is looking forward decades into the future, what is a reasonable number to use for long-term planning? And so that reasonable number to use for long-term planning is down in the 3 or 4% range. And don't think that we're crazy. We know that it's a lot more than that right now, but remember that the reserve study is a 30-year product. But I want to put a plug in for this webinar that we recently did, Investments and Inflation. It's on our website. It's on YouTube. It was just enlightening to hear the words of community association and investment counselor, an expert, talk about the plight of so many boards who are letting their reserve funds sit in a bank's savings account and getting a fraction of a percent of interest, decimal points worth of interest, when it's very easy to be getting a professional on your side and getting at this point in time between 1 and 2.5% interest on your reserve investment. So it's very doable. Highly recommend that recording of our webinar. So it's fun to be able to provide insights and inputs to our clients like this, that they can go around and say, wow, that makes a difference at our association.
Yeah, great. Hey, Robert, it's a little past 11:40. How much time do we have for how many more questions?
Let's do one more question and then I'll bring it to a close. And again, we'll provide answers to all the unanswered questions in a follow-up video.
Great. So this is a question from Mason. Is there a rule of thumb for typical replacement reserve percentage amount of the operating budget?
Actually, that's a very good question. And let me do this. Let me take the PowerPoint back and then I'll slide that right into our close, okay? So here we go. And I'm going to go backwards a little bit into some sample slides. There we go. What we find, it's actually kind of interesting that this shows the reserve funding portion of an association's total budget. And you can see that the majority of associations that are funding their reserves well are somewhere in the 15 to 40% range. The peak of the curve is at 25%. And so if you were to ask me, what should we be funding our reserves at? I would say a quarter of your total budget. So if you're if you're a condo and your monthly assessments are $400, I would hope that your reserve funding is in the range of $100. Yeah, that's just, again, rough numbers. You get a reserve study to find out what the number is for your association. But this is what we look at when we look at our clients. We try to assemble this information and counsel them what's right, what's appropriate for them. But a normal number is in the 15 to 40% range. And it's just Derek, as you've said, it's expensive out there. Well, let me bring this program to a close. I want to let you know that we have this new tool. I was tempted to pull it out and show you a couple of times. We use this all the time, and our clients are now using it. Basically, in the past, we gave you a reserve study that was a document, piece of paper. And then now I think we're 20 years into it. We've been delivering a PDF, an electronic version of the reserve study. And 2 years ago, we delivered uPlanIt to our clients. And basically, it's an online reserve calculator. So you can literally go in and play with your numbers, push something out, add a project, test and see what happens if you make something a little more expensive. And you're able to run the numbers. It's free to all Association Reserves clients for the year. And if you're not a current Association Reserves client, you can get a subscription for the rest of your budget season for $149. So it's a very inexpensive, wonderful little tool. And want to remind you that we have so many resources on our website or on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and you search for something like Reserve Study Basics or any one of our reserve investments and inflation, it will pull up the video and you can subscribe to it and get notifications of all the deep library of resources we have on YouTube. And that's in addition to what we have on our website. And we offer these resources because we are here to help guide you and your association towards a successful future. And you heard from Derek, myself, we have years, decades of guiding clients safely down this path towards the future. We know what the obstacles are, and we're here to help, not just when we provide a reserve study, but in all these resources that we have here on our website and again on YouTube. And what I recommend for recent webinars, the uPlanIt demonstration, it shows you how to use this tool for the benefit of your association. We spoke about investments and inflation, a webinar that we did just recently. Developing the funding plan showed you the thought process that goes into creating the funding plan for your association. And then avoiding reserves quicksand. That was a fun one that we did just last month. The idea that you're on a path to the future and don't get off the path and get stuck in these various different obstacles that you can get sidetracked into. Upcoming webinars, advanced concepts for managers and boards, that's coming up actually I think next week. And then funding reserves, what happens when you don't? It's a real interactive showing you, okay, these are your decision points and showing you what goes on depending on what decisions you make. Many more resources at Association Reserves. Our website is reservestudy.com. And we are, as we said before, here to help. Here is our contact information for Derek and myself. We are here to try to make sure you guys have success, or at least have the right answers. And that was the point of this session today. Q&A, being able to just chat and share with you and help you hear from the questions of others, all that's going on, what are you thinking, what are you working with, what are you struggling with, so that you, whether you're a manager, board member, or a homeowner, are better armed to make decisions that are in the best interest of your association. I want to thank you each for attending. If you have any questions or if there's any way we can be of service to you, please don't hesitate to contact us.